I'm based here in the United States. I helped start an organization 13 years ago called Partners in Food Solutions, which is a consortium of 7 of the world's largest global food companies. And just thinking about our last speaker, the farming side of this, the former CEO of Cargill, a guy named Greg Page, once said, a farmer without a market is a gardener. And our work is focused in Africa, and there are still way too many gardeners who are growing the food, but are lacking that sustainable downstream market. So we have been working to work with small and growing food companies across the continent of Africa, and doing that in a way that is leveraging the know-how and expertise of these 7 large food companies. So General Mills, Cargill, DSM, Buehler, Hershey's, these are all US European companies who together have over 800 years of know-how and expertise. So the typical company we're working with in Africa is a company that might have $1,800,000 US dollars in turnover. So an order of magnitude smaller, but a company that is facing the same challenges technically and business-wise as any of our 7 large companies. And so we were able to very quickly see that even though we were 8,000 miles separated, or order of magnitude difference in size, we could leverage the talent and know-how of the employees of these companies to help build the capacity of these companies that sit right in the middle of the value chain. So if you think about the farmer on one end, growing something, and a consumer on the other end who is going to consume that, all of the links need to be working in tandem. And across Africa, unfortunately, many of those links are broken. And so lots of NGOs can and do focus on making farmers more productive. We saw the opportunity to help right in the middle of the value chain to help these food companies get better at what they're doing. And the outcome of that is reliable, sustainable markets for millions of smallholder farmers, and then more local, reliable, safe food produced on the continent. Africa is a continent of 1 billion people, will be 2 billion in the coming years. 25% of the continent is food insecure, and that percentage has gone up during COVID. And the continent still imports $40 billion of food every year. And if the world grows to be 9 billion people, as it's expected to by 2050, and we're going to feed that world of 9 billion, there's only one part of the world that is under-leveraged and under-indexed, and that is the continent of Africa. So we will not be able to feed 9 billion people on this planet unless Africa can first feed itself and ultimately become a net exporter of food. I used to live in Zambia, and massive underproduction. The typical yields for an African farmer, a very small percentage of what a US or European farmer on the same crop. And that's not because the technology doesn't exist. It's often know-how, or there's not markets downstream to buy that excess capacity that makes it worth growing. So the way our model works, this started as an initiative at a single company, General Mills. And it was rooted in the idea that because General Mills R&D was centralized in Minneapolis in the US, serving the global business, when we first encountered some of these food companies in sub-Saharan Africa, the head of R&D, who was one of my co-founders from General Mills, said, we can help this company and we can help them remotely, which I, having just moved back from Zambia, was very skeptical of. But the reason he knew they could do that was that's how they were serving the global business. So if we could get a well-scoped project from a small food company in Zambia or Tanzania or Kenya, we could build a remote team to serve the needs of that client. And Peter, my co-founder, was correct in that hypothesis, and that allowed us to think at scale. If helping a food company in Africa required someone to get on an airplane from the US or Europe and leave work for 2 weeks, we would have been able to think about helping a dozen companies. But instead, if we could take an hour or two from dozens and then hundreds and ultimately thousands of employees and aim that at very specific problems identified by these companies on the ground, or named by these companies on the ground, then we could think at scale. And so that's what we did. Part of the model required on-the-ground local staff. So we began hiring talented food technologists who were from the countries where we were working. They became the bridge or translator between these small food companies and our talent pool across US and Europe and the rest of the world. So that remote model was well ahead of COVID, where we all went remote, and allowed us to tap into tens of thousands of hours each year from these employees. So a client in Kenya who's trying to develop a new product, doesn't have R&D staff, works with our local staff, that gets scoped and then flipped back to our team. And then we go to our volunteer database and recruit 2 or 3 employees, maybe from 2 or 3 of our 7 corporate partners. And then they work together over a 2 or 3 month period and deliver that solution back. We found over the years that the clients we're serving in Africa need technical know-how, expertise. They also need financial capital. So we've partnered with a number of different investors, impact investors, many other Ashoka fellows working in that space to help deliver the financial capital. And when that happens, when all those things come together, we're able to see those companies grow, employ more people, buy more raw material from farmers, and serve the local market with local food stuff. Let me conclude just on, you mentioned the need for businesses to engage and sometimes the challenge of that. I think part of why this has lasted 13 years, why it went beyond just the initial leadership of the CEO and General Mills at the time, was that there was a byproduct of value that has come back to the corporate partners that makes us very sticky and makes it very hard for them to leave. And that is the work that we began 13 years ago has been very much on trend with, unbeknownst to us, this wasn't because we were smart and saw this, it's just happened. The trend in the US and Europe for companies to recognize that they have to be about more than just the bottom line. They have to be finding ways to be more additive to society. And likewise, their employees, millennials and Gen Z coming out of college, are demanding to work for companies where not only is that company committed to doing the right thing, but they want to participate in it. So in the US, companies for decades have had a tradition of allowing employees to volunteer, but that might mean a 30-year educated and experienced PhD nutritionist going for a day to hang drywall on a construction project with Habitat for Humanity. That's great, and they should do that. But that is not tapping into that person's knowledge and talent. So when you allow that employee to use their core knowledge to, say, in this case, formulate a product that's going to go to malnourished mothers in Malawi, that is a value add experience for that employee that makes them feel like, okay, I am working at a company that is making a difference, and I am part of making that difference. So all 7 of our corporate partners now leverage Partners in Food Solutions as a tool to recruit talent. The second big piece of this is a typical project will have, let's say, someone from Cargill in Amsterdam working with someone from General Mills in Minneapolis and someone from Bühler in Switzerland. So that cross-cultural team is then working with one of our local staff, say in Kenya, to solve the problem of a client in Western Kenya that has intermittent electricity. So to be able to solve that problem and deliver that solution remotely with that cross-cultural team, with this talented entrepreneur, if you can run a food company in Africa, you are a talented entrepreneur. So the learning that happens for that employee and the skill development that happens for that employee is additive to what every CEO of our 7 corporate partners would say they want to see being developed within their employees. So the employee is sitting there feeling like, this is the best thing I've gotten to do this week at work. Meanwhile, they're getting skills that their manager is saying, these are the skills we want to see developed in our employees. And a food company in Africa is getting the help that they couldn't access locally. It's the definition of sustainable because everybody's winning. So I think for those of you who are seeking to engage companies, it's imperative to find those mechanisms that are going to be not just helping your work, but truly adding value back to their businesses. And again, we stumbled into that versus designing that, but I think that's been an important lesson. So I'll pause there, see if there's any questions.
There is one question. What are the biggest challenges and obstacles on this way to make Africa agriculturally independent or even importer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I mentioned, for those of you familiar, from the agricultural space, it's every link has to work, right? And sadly, across the continent, depending on the country, several of those links often aren't working or aren't connected. So for example, if you talk to any of our clients, one of the most consistent challenges they will say is, I can't get enough reliable raw material from farmers. Likewise, if you go to that farmer group that's 30 kilometers away, and you ask them what their greatest challenge is, we can't get access to market. So you've got these broken linkages where the supply is there, the demand is there, but there's that last mile gap. So I think that's well recognized. You have lots of organizations working to address that. And I think in time, a lot of market forces are going to force that to happen. Again, I think African agriculture is going to have its moment because it's going to have to. And sadly, as we know, the West often doesn't engage Africa until it needs it. But I think in this case, that's going to be helpful because we're not going to feed the whole world unless Africa is producing. So we're seeing more and more investment in this space. And I think greater recognition. Ethiopia, for example, has a parastatal organization that is private sector oriented, but it's connected and reports into the prime minister. This is before some of the troubles in Ethiopia. It still exists. It's called the Ethiopian Agricultural Transformation Agency. And they are looking at all from a national scale, what are all of the linkages that are broken and how do we address that? But it's gonna be private sector in partnership with governments cracking that and figuring that out.
How is the operation financed? That's the second question.
Yeah, so our corporate partners are our funding engine. So because we're providing this rich experience for their employees, they are using philanthropic capital to fund our work. We then partner also with private donors who see that they can leverage that corporate sector investment. So that's both individuals and foundations. And then for 12 years, we've partnered with institutions like USAID, US government's aid arm, the Gates Foundation. They have funded a lot of our field staff. So this is what I like in my seat is I can go to any of our donors and say, your money's being leveraged in at least 2 other ways. So for every dollar, General Mills, who is our first and is our biggest corporate partner, for every dollar General Mills has put in over the last 13 years, someone else has put in $18. And that's true in every other direction. So we're able to really, for donors, feel like, hey, this is a highly leveraged activity. I'm not in this alone. And that took a lot of time to build, but I think building those coalitions serve organizations like ours well.